The wind howls through a dying forest, the sky burns with lightning, and a lone man stands in the open field, drenched in rain, screaming into the storm. His voice trembles with pride and madness. "This land is mine," he cries, but the earth rumbles beneath him like a living beast awakened. The soil cracks, the ground splits, and before his echo fades, the earth swallows him whole. Silence, the rain stops. Only the sound of thunder fading over the hills remains. They say the land of Odo Arbor remembers every footprint, every seed, every sin. And when a man's greed grows greater than the soil he stands on, the earth itself will rise to take him back. This is the story of the greedy farmer who wanted all the land and ended up with none.
Fair African Tales. Subscribe and turn on the bell for new stories.
In the heart of the sunlit village of Odo Arbor, where the wind carried the scent of ripe yam and cassava, the land stretched wide and golden beneath the morning sky. Palm trees swayed gently at the edges of green fields, their fronds whispering stories of old, stories of the ancestors who had blessed this soil with life and abundance. Every dawn, the village awoke to the rhythm of hoes striking earth, of laughter rising from clustered farms, and the low hum of folk songs sung by men and women whose hearts were at peace with their labour. The land was kind, the rivers faithful, and the people thankful. Among these people lived Kumo, a farmer known for the strength in his arms and the sharpness in his mind. His compound stood near the old baobab tree, and every season his harvest filled his barns to the brim. He was respected, even admired, for his hard work, his diligence, and the way he never let a day pass without tending to his crops. Yet behind his calm eyes, a quiet storm was forming. For each time Kumo looked upon his neighbour's farms, lush and green, spreading wider than his own, a small spark of envy flickered within him. He would watch the elder farmer, Oba, whose sons helped him plough 3 vast fields, and he would think, why should Oba's land be twice the size of mine when my hands work harder than his? He would pass by the smiling couple, Dana and Marku, as they harvested their maize, and his heart would tighten. They do not labour as I do, yet the gods bless them more. In the evenings, when the golden sun dipped low and the village gathered to share palm wine and stories, Kumo would sit apart, his gaze distant. The laughter of others grated softly against his pride. He began to measure land not by the effort it took to till it, but by the envy it stirred in him. His wife, Ada, noticed the shift. How his once joyful spirit grew restless, how his eyes no longer softened at the sight of home. One night, as the moon bathed the village in silver light, Ada spoke gently, her voice laced with worry. "Kumo," she said, "our barn is full, our children are strong, our roof keeps the rain. Why do you still look to another man's land?" But Kumo only turned away, his jaw tight, his heart whispering lies that the earth owed him more. And so, while the village of Odo Arbor slept peacefully, Kumo lay awake, staring into the darkness, dreaming of fields without end, fields that would one day all belong to him. He could not see that the same soil he coveted was listening, patient and silent, waiting for the seed of his greed to take root. For in Odo Arbor the land remembers, and the land always answers. The morning sun spilled its warmth upon Odo Arbor as the villagers gathered beneath the towering Iroko tree, the ancient heart of the community. Its massive roots coiled into the earth like the arms of time itself, and beneath its shade, the voices of men and women rose in harmony and debate. The matter of the day was land, always land, for it was the breath of the village, the source of life and pride. A few old farmers had decided to sell their distant farmlands, saying their strength was failing and their sons had moved away to the towns. Kumo stood among them, arms folded, his eyes narrow with thought. As he listened, something stirred within him. An idea, soft at first, then sharp as a blade. The words of the elders floated in the air like drifting leaves, but Kumo's mind had already leapt beyond their counsel. He heard not the wisdom in their warnings, only the call of opportunity. "The land chooses its owner," said Elder Onibudo, his voice firm and deep. "Greed blinds a man to the will of the soil. You may buy a farm with money, but you cannot buy its blessing." The others nodded solemnly, their eyes reflecting years of understanding. But Kumo only smiled faintly, pretending to agree. In his heart, he dismissed the elders' words as superstition meant for the weak. As the meeting dispersed, Kumo lingered behind, gazing at the fields stretching beyond the horizon. The wind carried the scent of new grass and promise, and he whispered to himself, "If the land chooses, then it shall choose me, all of it." His ambition gleamed like sunlight on a blade. That evening, he returned home with a strange light in his eyes. Ada met him at the doorway, wiping her hands on her wrapper, her face soft with concern. "You've been quiet all day," she said, searching his face. "What did the elders decide?" Kumo's lips curved into a knowing smile. "They speak of selling land, Ada. Good land, fertile land. Perhaps this is the chance the gods have sent us." Ada frowned, sensing the shift in his tone. "We have enough, my husband. The gods bless us already. Too much land can bury a man before his time." But her words fell like rain on hardened clay. Kumo's mind had already begun to weave its plans. How to buy, how to trade, how to outsmart those too simple to see their fortunes slipping away. That night, as the village fires dimmed and silence crept across Odoaba, Kumo sat awake, drawing lines in the dust with his finger, shaping the borders of fields not yet his. In the stillness, the whisper of greed breathed softly through his thoughts, sweet and poisonous. He imagined himself standing over miles of farmland, his name carried with reverence across the hills. The stars looked down in quiet witness as Kumo's dreams grew darker, his heart swelling with hunger for more. The gentle farmer who once rose with gratitude now lay awake with calculation. In the silence, the iroko tree swayed, its leaves whispering a warning that the night carried away, unheard. The days that followed wrapped Odoaba in a strange stillness, as though the village itself sensed that something unseen had begun to shift beneath the soil. Kumo moved through the markets and paths with a new confidence, his voice smooth, his words coated in honey. He spoke of friendship, of opportunity, of shared gain, and the people listened, some with trust, some with caution. He had learned to smile while hiding his hunger, to offer with one hand while the other closed in quiet greed. It began with old Adaronki, whose children had gone to the city and whose strength had withered with time. Her small plot near the river had become too much for her to tend, and when Kumo came offering help, she saw kindness in his face. "I will work your land for you," he said softly, "and in return, I shall share the harvest." Grateful, she agreed, and in a season's turn, the land that was hers was no longer hers at all. The agreement was lost in clever words, and her field became part of Kumo's expanding empire. Then came Maku, whose debts had grown heavier than his tools could lift. Kumo promised to clear them, offering a bag of cowries and a handshake, but in the fine threads of the deal lay a trap. The documents he drew up were written not to help, but to take. Within moons, Maku stood on the edge of the field that had once been his, watching Kumo's men harvest his yams. When he protested, Kumo's eyes hardened like dry clay. "The land rewards the one who knows how to use it," he said coldly. One by one, the fields around Odoaba fell beneath Kumo's control. Where laughter once floated over ridges and furrows, now silence settled. The other farmers no longer sang as they worked. The paths that led past Kumo's growing estate grew quieter each day. Even the birds seemed to avoid his farmlands, perching instead on distant trees, as if the soil beneath his feet had lost its soul. Ada watched with unease as her husband's barns swelled and his smile faded. The more he gained, the less human he seemed. He rose before dawn not to greet the earth with prayer, but to count his lands like a king surveying conquered territory. "Kumo," she said one morning, her voice trembling, "when will it be enough?" He looked at her, eyes dark and proud. "Enough is for the small-hearted," he replied. "The land listens to strength, not mercy." But the land listened differently. The nights around his compound grew eerily quiet. The wind no longer carried the sweet scent of soil after rain. His workers whispered that the ground felt cold, that the yams beneath it turned bitter before harvest. Yet Kumo paid no heed. He stood often at the top of his largest hill, arms folded, gazing across his acres with pride swelling in his chest. He believed he had conquered destiny itself, that the gods had chosen him as the master of all he surveyed. But the earth beneath him waited patiently, as it always does, for the day it would remind him that no man, no matter how cunning, can own the breath of the land. It began without warning. One season melted into the next, and the skies that once burst open with generous rain grew silent and hard. Clouds passed like ghosts over Odoaba, heavy with promise yet empty of mercy. The air thickened with heat, the kind that sits upon the skin and refuses to leave. The soil that had once yielded yam and maize now cracked like broken pottery. And the river that wound through the village shrank into a thin silver thread, whispering faintly as it died. Kumo stood in the middle of his fields, the sun beating mercilessly upon his back. His once green acres lay bare and lifeless. The crops that had sprouted strong at the beginning of the season now bent low, yellowed and brittle, thirsting for rain that would not come. The ground beneath his feet was no longer soft and rich. It had turned to dust that clung to his ankles as he walked, as if mocking him with each step. All around the village, people murmured of strange times. Yet, curiously, while Kumo's great fields suffered, the smaller communal plots, those shared by families who still worked together, somehow endured. Their harvests were not abundant, but they were enough to keep hunger away. Those who shared their land with others still found life in their soil. Those who hoarded found only emptiness. At first, Kumo refused to see the difference. He ordered his labourers to dig deeper, to water the dying crops from the wells. But the wells themselves had begun to dry. His barns echoed hollow. His storerooms grew bare. When his men grew weary and fearful, they whispered that the land was angry, that the spirits of the soil had turned their faces away. Kumo silenced them with curses, yet at night, when sleep refused him, he heard the same whispers in his mind. Days stretched into weeks, and the drought deepened. The village elders spoke softly beneath the Iroko tree, their voices heavy with pity. Ada begged Kumo to seek help from the priest before it was too late. Reluctantly, with pride still burning in his chest, he went. The priest's hut stood at the edge of the village, surrounded by old stones and carved idols that seemed to breathe when the wind blew. The air inside was cool and smelled of herbs and ash. The old priest sat cross-legged before a bowl of cowries, his white beard flowing like river foam. He did not look up when Kumo entered. "You have come too late, son of the earth," the priest said softly, as though speaking to the air itself. Kumo frowned. "I came for answers, not riddles," he said, his tone sharp, his pride still intact though his lands lay dying. The priest lifted his eyes, and in them burned something ancient, something knowing. "The land knows the heart of its master," he said. "It gives to those who respect it, but it closes itself to greed. You took more than your spirit could carry, and now the soil rejects you." Kumo's fists tightened. "I have worked harder than any man in this village," he said through clenched teeth. "I have earned what is mine." The priest's voice deepened like thunder before rain. "Nothing on earth is yours. You are but a guest on the land's back." But Kumo turned away, his heart deafened by pride. As he left, the wind rose suddenly, carrying a strange rustle through the priest's compound, a sound like laughter from beneath the ground. Kumo paused, looking back once, then walked on, his shadow stretching long behind him across the dry, cracked earth. That night, as he lay awake, the silence outside was unbearable. No crickets sang, no wind stirred. Only the faint groan of the earth, tired and hungry, kept him company. And though Kumo would never admit it, deep within him, a quiet fear began to grow, the fear that the land he had conquered had begun to conquer him instead. That night, the heat was heavy and strange, pressing against the air as if the sky itself had stopped breathing. Kumo lay restless upon his mat, his mind churning with worry and defiance. The drought had devoured his fields, his wealth was fading like footprints in dust, and yet his hunger for more had not dimmed. It burned hotter, as if the fire of his greed had grown stronger the more it was denied. When sleep finally came, it came dark and deep. In the dream, Kumo stood upon a vast plain of gold-coloured soil that stretched beyond the horizon. The sky above shimmered like molten copper, and a cool wind whispered through invisible grass. A voice rose from the earth, soft at first, then clear, smooth, and terrible in its beauty. "Kumo," it called, "why do you settle for dust when the true land lies beyond the hills?" He turned and saw a tall spirit standing before him, robed in mist and shadow, eyes glowing like hidden embers. "Follow where the rivers end," the spirit said, "and claim the land that no man has dared to touch. There the earth will bow to you alone." When Kumo awoke, his heart thundered, as if the spirit's voice still echoed in it. The dawn crept pale through his window, but the world around him felt strange, distant, unreal. He rose, eyes wild with resolve, and began to gather what little he had left. His wife's pleas fell unheard as he sold the last of his goats, his tools, even their household pots, all to prepare for his final journey. "You chase shadows, Kumo," Ada cried, clutching his arm. "The gods have spoken through your loss. Why do you not listen?" He tore himself free, his voice hard and distant. "You will see, Ada. The gods have not cursed me, they have tested me, and I will rise greater than before." At sunrise, he set out alone, his walking stick heavy in his hand. his path leading toward the deep forest beyond the hills. The villagers watched from a distance, whispering prayers and warnings, for no one went beyond those woods. They were the forbidden grounds, lands where even the birds refused to fly, where spirits were said to guard the secrets of the earth. The forest swallowed him quickly. Its air was thick and humming, filled with the rustle of unseen wings and whispers that slithered between the trees. Shadows moved like living things. The light dimmed to a green twilight that seemed to bend and breathe. Still, Kumo pressed on, his mind fixed on the promise of endless land. The deeper he went, the more the path twisted, as though the forest mocked him, leading him in circles, stealing the direction from his feet. He began to hear voices, soft laughter that rose from the roots, songs without melody carried by the wind. The trees seemed to shift when he turned away, and the earth beneath him pulsed faintly, like a sleeping heart. "I am close," he muttered, staggering forward, sweat gleaming on his brow. "The land is near, I can feel it." But the air around him grew colder. The smell of the soil changed, no longer sweet and living, but sharp, metallic, like blood and stone. At last, he came upon an open clearing where no grass grew, only blackened earth that shimmered as if it had once been fire. The spirit's voice returned, faint and echoing. "Here is your land, Kumo, claim it." He fell to his knees, pressing his hands to the ground, laughing in mad triumph. But the earth beneath his palms was not warm. It was trembling. The laughter that rose from the trees turned hollow and cruel. Still, Kumo began to mark the soil, drawing lines in the dirt, whispering to himself, "Mine, mine, all mine." The wind howled through the forest, carrying 1,000 voices that seemed to chant his name and curse it in the same breath. The sky darkened, though the sun had not yet set, and somewhere far beneath him something stirred awake. He did not see the forest close behind him. He did not hear the whisper that followed, low and cold. "The land remembers." He only felt the trembling earth beneath his knees, the heartbeat of the soil that had waited long for this moment. And still he smiled, believing he had found his final kingdom. The air grew heavy, thick with a silence that pressed against the world. The forest around Kumo darkened, its green fading to a sickly hue as clouds gathered above, heavy and restless. The wind that once whispered now began to howl, bending the trees like frightened creatures bowing to an unseen power. Still, Kumo stood in the middle of the blackened clearing, his face twisted in pride and defiance, marking the soil with his stick as if carving his name into the bones of the earth. Thunder rolled like a growl from the heavens, deep and rumbling. The sky split open with flashes of white fire, and the ground beneath Kumo's feet shuddered. Yet he did not stop. "This land is mine," he cried into the storm. "Do you hear me? Mine!" His voice rose, swallowed by the roaring wind. The rain that came was not gentle. It fell in great, angry sheets, hammering the soil, turning it to mud that clung to his legs like hands trying to pull him down. The trees around him began to twist and moan, their roots stirring like serpents beneath the surface. The air reeked of wet earth and something older, deeper, vengeful. Lightning cracked across the clearing, blinding white. For a heartbeat, Kumo saw the face of the spirit again, hovering in the rain, eyes glowing with the fire of the underworld. "You were warned," it whispered, its voice both mournful and merciless. "The land gives only to those who honor it. You sought to own what was never yours." Kumo staggered backward, his stick falling from his trembling hand. The earth beneath him trembled again, harder this time, the ground splitting in jagged lines that crawled outward like veins. A low, thunderous groan rose from beneath, as if the very soil had found its voice. The ground gave way. He fell, clutching at roots and stones, his scream drowned by the storm. The earth swallowed him whole, slowly, deliberately, as if reclaiming what had always belonged to it. When the last of his cry faded, the rain fell harder, sealing the wound of the earth as if nothing had ever been disturbed. Far away in Odoaba, the villagers watched the storm roll across the distant hills. They saw lightning strike again and again where Kumo had gone, the sky glowing with strange fire. Ada stood outside their empty compound, her wrapper clinging to her in the rain, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She whispered his name once, quietly, but the wind carried it away. When morning came, the storm had passed. The forest was calm, washed clean, silent. Those brave enough to go searching found no trace of Kumo, no footprints, no tools, not even the clearing where he had last stood. The land had changed. Grass grew thick and wild where his fields had once stretched, swallowing every path, every sign of ownership. His great barns had collapsed in the night, their wooden frames buried beneath creeping vines. The villagers gathered in silence, staring at the emptiness that had replaced his fortune. Even the air felt different, lighter somehow, as if the soil itself had sighed in relief. They spoke softly among themselves, not of curses, but of justice, the justice of the land that had taken back what greed had stolen. That night, the village fires burned low. The children were kept close indoors. Only the wind moved, whispering through the fields, carrying a faint sound that might have been the earth's laughter or its warning. For in Odoaba, they said ever after, the land does not forget, and the land always takes back its own. The seasons turned once more, and with time the scars that greed had carved into Odoaba began to fade. The rains returned, soft and forgiving, washing over the fields that had long been silent. The air grew rich again with the scent of growing things, and the laughter of farmers rose once more with the dawn. Where once the earth had hardened beneath pride, it now breathed with life and humility. The people learned, and the land forgave. In the place where Kumo's vast fields had once stretched, there was now open ground covered in wildflowers and young shoots of maize. No fences marked ownership, no boundaries divided it. The villagers worked side by side, sharing the soil as their ancestors had before envy took root. They tilled the earth together, sang old songs to the rhythm of hoes striking ground, and the land answered with abundance. Ada still lived at the edge of the village, in the small hut that time had not taken. Each morning she walked barefoot to the place where her husband's barns once stood. There she tended a modest garden of vegetables and herbs, her hands gentle in the soil. She no longer spoke his name aloud, but her eyes carried both sorrow and peace. Sometimes she would pause, pressing her palm against the ground, whispering softly, "May your spirit find rest, Kumo. May the land forgive what the heart could not." The wind would stir around her as if the earth itself had heard and accepted her prayer. Children played nearby, their laughter bright and free. They sang songs that told the story of the greedy farmer who wanted all the land and ended up with none. Their voices rose in playful rhythm, a melody both innocent and wise. The soil gives to all, but takes from one who takes too much. The elders listened and nodded, pleased that the lesson had taken root deeper than any seed. As the sun set each evening, the village gathered beneath the great Iroko tree once again. They spoke not of wealth or ownership, but of balance, of gratitude, of how the earth was not a treasure to be possessed, but a gift to be shared. Elder Onibudo, his hair white as cotton, often ended their gatherings with the same words, spoken softly into the dusk. The land belongs to all, for it is the land that owns us. And when night fell and the stars spread across the sky like seeds scattered by a divine hand, the people of Odo Aba would sit in quiet peace, feeling the pulse of the soil beneath them. The earth was alive again, kind again, for it had been reminded of humility through the folly of one man. And so the story of Kumo became not one of sorrow alone, but of wisdom passed down through generations. A tale told beside fires, beneath trees, in fields where hands met soil with reverence. For the people of Odo Aba knew this truth, spoken in their final proverb and carried in every breath of wind that touched the earth. He who wants all the land will one day be buried by it.
Subscribe for more amazing African stories.